8 days ago, Kemi Badenoch said this.
What I'm doing is turning the Conservative Party into the traditional, authentic conservatism that people recognise. And that's going to mean taking some tough decisions. I'm afraid if people don't like it, then they are welcome to leave.
And yesterday, the first sitting Tory MP followed Kemi's instructions and switched to Reform.
The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I'm not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant. Because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative.
Danny Kruger joins Andrea Jenkins, Nadine Dorries, Jake Berry, and many others as a former Conservative who's jumped ship. But his defection is being taken a little more seriously. That's because he is a sitting MP and was in fact a shadow minister until yesterday. He's also thought of as a relatively serious thinker by people on the right. Jack Rankin, Tory MP for Windsor, said this. So sad to read this. Danny isn't like the clowns they've accepted of late. That's Reform. He's smart and wise and good. Whilst we share a similar analysis of the change the country needs, I disagree strongly about the vehicle with which to do so, but I respect his decision. Gutted. Ben Houchin is Tory Mayor of Tees Valley. He said this. I like Danny. He's a good man, principled, clear in his convictions, a deep thinker, and not an MP that is driven by ego or self-promotion. Sad to see him leave. Danny Kruger describes himself as a communitarian. He's also a socially conservative evangelical Christian. So his defection potentially strengthens the evangelical flavour of Britain's populist right. It also further weakens the authority of Kemi Badenoch as Tory leader, though she's found a silver lining.
Danny has made his case very clear that this is not about me. I can't be distracted by that, and I'm not going to get blown off course by these sorts of incidents. I know that this is the sort of thing that is going to happen while a party is changing.
This is the kind of thing that will happen while a party is changing. It's changing. Kemi, it's changing. The problem is it's changing for the worse. Have you seen your poll ratings recently? We're changing. Yeah, you're projected to get 50 seats at the next general election. Now, that was Kemi Badenoch simply exuding charisma and authority. And she pleaded that none of this was about her while standing in a literal pigsty. All very bizarre. Let's move on. Stephen. Kruger, I think, is a significant figure, isn't he? He's a former speechwriter to David Cameron, political secretary for Boris Johnson, a quite close ally, it's fair to say, of Robert Jenrick. If he's leaving the party, that indicates a few things, namely that Robert Jenrick might not win if Kemi goes. That surprised me because I thought there would be something of a contest and he would be a variable. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
I think it does say, I mean, look, let's start with Danny Kruger's own seat. So his seat in East Wiltshire, he won it with like a 5,000 vote majority the last election. By February, that had been cut to a projected 2,000. And in the more recent polling, he's got a 1 in 3 chance of winning, and Reform has a 2 in 3 chance of winning. So there might be some self-serving, I want to stay on as an MP, it's a cushy life going on here. On the Jenrick point, I think he is right that, I mean, I think that's a good hypothesis that he's switching over to Reform because he doesn't think the Tories can be taken in a direction that Jenrick would take them in if he won. And that's because he thinks Jenrick can't win it. And I think there's something to that. And I think there's actually maybe something like politically sensible about that, because, you know, what's making Reform look attractive to some Tories, some high profile Tories. We saw Maria Caulfield go today as well, former health minister, no longer an MP though. What's making it look attractive is that Nigel Farage is positioning it away from the kind of base building that he did before he became an MP, and even briefly after, when he first took over Reform, of sort of appealing to a lot of people who were very, very passionate about, you know, things like remigration or mass deportation. And he's sort of settled on a position now where he's saying, okay, we'll have 600,000 deportations in our first parliament. That sounds like a huge number, but it's not nearly enough for a lot of the people that he was talking to before or trying to appeal to before. And he's slowly having to move over because he knows that to get into government, he can't just appeal to the people. Not, I'm not saying the whole march in London on Saturday involved the kinds of people he was appealing to before, but I'm saying, a fair chunk will have done. He knows that he can't do a policy pitch that is going to appeal to those people and win government because the country is vast and most British people don't hold anything like any kind of views like that. But plenty of people who will be concerned about migration, and perhaps the 600,000 figure is what he thinks of as a reasonable figure to be able to attract those people while clinging on to as many of the others as possible, and potentially knowing full well that he won't be able to achieve that very easily without transforming the whole state. So having moved himself more towards the centre, he starts to look as like a more appealing prospect for these for Tories who can see that the party is not going to try and battle him on that kind of ground, that the party might swing away from migration as its topic and battle on another ground, or become completely irrelevant, which it pretty much is at the moment. But they become even more irrelevant, become dead, as Kruger said in that piece. And I think there is a chance of the Tory party dying. I mean, I think if I were in charge of Tory strategy, I would be saying something like, look, Reform has pitched a 600,000 deportation number. We know that's not possible because we couldn't even send anyone, like people to Rwanda on our crazy scheme. Let's pitch a more reasonable migration figure, for example, something about the boats or something about making visas harder. And let's just bang on tax. Let's just talk about tax. It's the economy, stupid. Let's make that the thing. Now, that's not going to get the kind of headlines that the kind of migration stuff at the moment will, but it will appeal to a lot of people who won't be trusting Farage on the economy. And I think that would be the canny thing for them to do. I think people like Kruger may have jumped too soon because it may be that, there could be a leadership election. Badenoch may go. She may get better advisors. We're still quite a long way out of an election. And Reform is still a party that's in the middle of its kind of creation. So anything can happen in Reform. And as we see, there are a lot of people who turned out in those protests on Saturday, a lot of people online who didn't turn out to those protests, the Tommy Robinson protests on Saturday, who are very, very angry with Farage and losing interest in him as a political figure. So yeah, I think there's still, I think the Tories, there's a good chance that they're dead, but I think that there are pathways for them to revive themselves. But it means giving up on the kind of culture wars or wars over migration that they are so practiced at doing now. That's become such a lazy kind of placeholder for policies. And if they started actually developing policies, and they actually started talking about the economy, which Tories are usually quite good at doing, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, their fortunes might change, and Kruger may still regret this move to Reform.
Yeah, it's a really strange one. This is such a strange story for me. I mean, Kruger's going because he thinks Generic, Bobby Ozempic, doesn't have a chance of winning, seemingly, which would indicate that James Cleverly will. But if you're a centrist, I'm not suggesting that people backing James Cleverly are all of this, but if you're a centrist, pro-business, vaguely pro-EU, because of course many of them were, but you accept Brexit, why wouldn't you just join the Lib Dems? I mean, before 2024, I would have said, why don't you just join Keir Starmer's Labour Party? But now I would just say, why don't you just join the Lib Dems? What's going to differentiate James Cleverly from the Lib Dems? And I think you're right, Stephen. It's going to be low tax. There's not much fat to cut when it comes to the British state anymore, I'm afraid, unless you do things like get rid of the triple lock. Which, yeah, if you index the public pensions in this country to wage or inflation, you're probably going to save a couple of billion a year, sure. But look at what just happened to Labour with regards to removing the winter fuel allowance. And by the way, before we go to our final story, that target announced by Reform of deporting 600,000 people will require leaving the ECHR. It will require getting rid of the Supreme Court, or at least passing acts of parliament which mean the Supreme Court is impotent on matters pertaining to this stuff. It will mean Farage having to create probably about 700-800 new lords. You know, this would be the single biggest constitutional rupture this country had seen since the Glorious Revolution. And Nigel Farage is going to do it. Richard Tice is going to do it. That's not to denigrate them. This stuff is really hard. This stuff is really hard. It would be a bigger constitutional revolution than Lloyd George did, right? And I think a lot of their supporters don't realize how big the shifts would have to be to make that doable. That 600,000 target doable. Now, I know many people watching this, or, you know, people on the right say, well, it needs to be more than that. It's the exact same with Brexit, right? Brexit could have been a quote unquote success if you didn't want to do everything all at once. Even if you want to leave the single market, you want to do X, Y, Z, fine. It's going to take you 10 years, just accept it. But no, we have to do everything all at once, and it's been a real problem. It's like saying, you know what, I want to lose weight and get my skin to look great, and I want, you know, eyebrows to look great, and I'm going to get Botox and filler and do this and that. I'm going to get a PhD, and I'm going to learn a foreign language, and I'm going to learn the piano. Self-improvement, you might not think it's self-improvement. I'm sort of, you know, dragging this out by talking about cosmetic surgery. You know, chill out. Maybe, I don't know, go have a facial, right? Start somewhere. No, we're going to do everything. Everything all at once. Very strange. I think the immediacy comes from social media, right? Everything now, all at once. Actually, politically, if you ever want to accomplish something, it takes a really long time. Both before you've got power and after. Look at Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher is the most transformative politician in this country's post-war history. In 1979, she introduces new taxes. She doesn't do anything crazy. She doesn't go all in on taking on organised labour, on privatising things until she's won a second time in 1983. That's how successful politicians operate. I say that as somebody who's not a big fan of Thatcher's project, believe it or not.